Hey everyone, this is Nick from the Botch Pit. Today, we will be discussing the Centimani, also known as the Hundred-Handed, as well as the Freaks. A Centimanus is a Promethean who practices the refinement of flux in Promethean the Created. Also, as a quick note, Centimanus is a singular form, while Centimani is the plural for these terrifying creatures. The sources used in this broadcast are Promethean the Created 1st and 2nd editions, as well as the source books Pandora's Book, Strange Alchemies, Saturnine Night, Magnum Opus, as well as Night Horrors the Tormented for Promethean the Created. No punches were pulled for this broadcast. We're running every book in the game line. As a note, for this guide, I'm going to approach it by combining 2E and 1E together to give a greater understanding of the subject matter. This will all make sense by the end of it. Introduction. The refinement of Centimani, Latin in origin, is named for the Greek monsters who guarded the Titans in Tartarus. Those who walk the path of the Hundred-Handed consider themselves heirs to the legacy of the ancient monsters of old. Inhuman and monstrously strong, they delve into the horrors they are capable of with a thirst that sickens those who value the ideals of human morality. Thus, they also go by the more colloquial title, Freaks, much to their disdain. A Promethean is an inhuman creature, shunned by both humanity and their environment. A Pandoran is simply a monster. A Centimanus is the monster's monster, the thing that even they fear, for good reason. Their appearances are frequently grotesque, inhuman, and strange. Possessing extra limbs, strange features, and other warped physiological abnormalities, a Promethean Centimanus might easily be mistaken for a Pandoran. However, that spark of intelligence and deliberation in their eyes makes them incredibly more deadlier. Flux transforms a Promethean body and mind. Many Centimanus are insane or, at the very least, highly unstable and unpredictable. By Flux's very nature, it is the prime enemy of order and coherence, and those who dwell in this refinement find it hard to keep their thoughts in check. Memories become jumbled and complex, rational thought becomes fleeting. It is only their Azoth that allows them to maintain any shred of sanity or identity. Thus, Centimani become creatures of ritual, investing in habits and practices they hold onto with a nearly religious observance. Centimani who are deprived of the sanity of the human experience try to find order in the ritualistic, horrific life of a monster. Indeed, some Prometheans consider the Centimani to be worse than the Pandorans. The Pandorans cannot help being the monstrosities they are. The Centimani can, however, yet seek absolute immersion in flux. But those few who seek to understand flux are creatures of incredible passion. That passion, though, may be fueled by an all-consuming loneliness, driving them to seek communion with the very horrors that would tear and rip them asunder to feast on the Azoth nested within them. The refinement of flux does not aid in completing the pilgrimage. It has no roles. It stands in direct opposition to the other refinements, so much so that it could be more properly called a degradation. The Freaks have abandoned the pilgrimage, either as a conscious choice or through despair, apathy, or frustration. Prometheans often head into this refinement for sheer survival. Sometimes, the created are their own worst enemy. The personal nature of the pilgrimage can drive them to do terrible things in the name of their new dawn. Many Prometheans consider Stannum the ground state of a Promethean, but Freaks know the truth. Past rage and torment tell there is division and chaos. This is the precipice that they stand on, staring into the abyss of pure dissolution. A Promethean can find peace in accepting their own nature. Some Centimani even see themselves as kin to the Lilithum, necessary agents of chaos and destruction. Others are less philosophical. They stop thinking and give themselves to instinct and impulse. Some are purely practical, seeing a path to absolute power. Many Centimani deal extensively with Pandorans. Shockingly, not only are they one of the greatest physical threats to Promethean survival, but also the philosophical antithesis of the Promethean's potential for rebirth as a human. The refinement, literal and metaphysical, of taint coming from the same source as each Promethean does. Most do so to gain a court of creatures that can teach them more about the inner workings of Flux. However, this crew must be fed regularly, and the Centimanus cannot erase these beings' need for Azoth. They satiate Pandorans by providing them some of their own flesh, or worse, allowing them to track, hunt, and consume the flesh of other Prometheans. Should a Promethean come to know the master behind the Pandorans attacking them and survive to tell the tale, the Centimanus is in danger of Promethean reprisal as others hear about them. For this reason, most Prometheans try to kill Centimani on sight, regardless whether their intentions are pure. Anyone who courts Flux must not be trusted. This is why Centimani tend to stick close to other Centimani when they encounter them, even if they hate each other's guts. Their strength in numbers, and Pandorans alone are not enough to withstand the ire of a Promethean throng. Not only do Centimani study Pandorans, they take it to the next level. Many take perverted Pandoran Transmutations upon themselves, wrapping their soul and body in the same taint that other Prometheans seek to leave behind. Their study of Flux allows them to adopt Pandoran Transmutations without the usual degradations that occur when their Promethean tries to tame Flux in such a manner. It also allows some of them to exert control over Pandorans so that they become master rather than prey. Despite their claims of immunity to the debilitating effects of Pandoran Transmutations, Centimani are often much less humane than their Promethean kin. The degenerative influence of Flux and the monstrous company of Pandorans tend to whittle away at a Centimanus' humanity more quickly than other Prometheans. Few Centimani, even those who claim to be pursuing the study of Flux without abandoning their pilgrimage, maintain too tight of an adherence to the ideals of humanity. Some Centimani argue that humans are far from these ideals, but that does not alter the fact that most outsiders believe that the path of Flux inherently leads a Centimanus further into their inhumanity, a journey from which is extremely difficult to return from. Even with this insurmounting danger, it usually is still not enough to motivate most Prometheans to shun a Centimanus should they encounter one. Regardless of how far from the ideals of humanity the refinement of Flux may take a Centimanus, a simple truth remains. No matter how twisted, no matter how deviant a Promethean Centimanus may become, they are still a Promethean and more akin to the rest of their kind than any other being can be. And upon a lonely pilgrimage, when all other beings shun one's presence and are so repulsed by one's very existence, it is difficult to cling to differences above similarities. The Centimani remind other Prometheans of what they truly are: monsters, freaks, walking corpses animated through mystical alchemies they can never completely comprehend. For all that Prometheans strive toward attaining humanity, the Centimani are a cruel mirror held up to remind Prometheans of their true nature. If the Centimani didn't exist, though, they couldn't hold a mirror up to the Prometheans who still follow the pilgrimage, spurring them on to humanity. While a wretch may pretend, while in the company of their throng, that their stitches do not exist, that they are not merely an amalgam of mismatched corpse limbs stitched together and granted some semblance of sentience when faced with the obvious inhumanity of one of the freaks. Pretending is not so easy. Extra limbs, horns, wings, or carapaces made of insect shells are unwavering reminders of the Centimani's inhumanity, and by extension, that of all Prometheans. Yet, Centimani are not irredeemable. All else aside, the refinement of Flux is just that, a refinement. Any freak can choose to switch to Stannum to escape the chaos and begin the difficult road back to the great work. Themes: body shock. The forced, extreme transformation of the body and the effects of this transformation on the psyche have been a frequent theme in horror and science fiction ever since the 1960s. The Thing, The Fly, Reanimator, Alien, Promethean is a game of body horror. Centimani, Pandorans, the effects of Flux on the world and its people, and, of course, the characters composed of multiple people all lend themselves to this kind of horror. Now, combine this idea with the practices of the Centimani and their Pandoran Transmutations. Suddenly, otherwise normal-looking bodies sprout tentacles and grow extra organs. a being bursts from a Promethean's chest. Growing claws is one thing, but growing tentacles is another. Disfigurements, such as the Centimani's extra limbs, should not be backhanded benefits, but ought to be a hindrance. They should not be usable for attacks, defense, or accomplishing tasks in certain situations. Characters ought not to gain benefits from their disfigurements, unless the nature of their bestowments is that the disfigurements are both inhumanly disturbing and somehow utilitarian. In this case, an extra pair of limbs might serve as both disfigurement and bestowment. Now, on a personal note, I always allow it because honestly, it's rad as anything, but as an educational point of view, please keep this in mind. Overview. Names. While names, both formal and informal, exist for those who follow each refinement, labels have also developed along other dividing lines over the course of centuries. The largest rift, and thus the largest divide when nicknames develop, is between the Centimani and those who follow the other major refinements. Non-Centimani Prometheans tend to refer to those who follow the Refinement of Flux as Centimani, the Hundred-Handed, or simply Freaks, while labeling themselves more nobly in the process. Perhaps the most insulting traditional self-naming pattern is for the non-Centimani to simply claim the label Promethean for themselves, using it only to refer to the non-Centimani, and refusing to acknowledge direct connection with those who study flux. These individuals may refer to the Centimani as Epimetheans, referring to Prometheus' legendary brother who married Pandora, and thus was in part responsible for her releasing of the world's ills from her legendary box. These individuals tend to see the division between Promethean and Epimethean as one that runs deeper than a temporary path of study. Some label non-Centimani as laborers, tied to the labors of Hercules, drawing a contextual line between their own journey toward humanity and the Herculean task placed upon the Greek demigod. They also label non-laborers as Gerians, likening them to the three-headed, six-legged giant who attempted to stop Hercules from achieving one of his challenges. Some even label due to more of a matter of belonging or not, with less emphasis on good or bad. Nostrata, meaning ours, while referring to the Centimani as advene, meaning foreigners. Centimani, of course, have their own traditions as well. Some, especially those who see the refinement of flux as a vital part of their continued pilgrimage, refer to those not of the refinement as Homerians. This refers to the Greek hero Homer's blindness, as well as to the origins of the word that means sons of hostages. These Centimani believe that the Homerians' own narrowness of perspective and unwillingness to see whatever necessary to find the keys to humanity is akin to them being held hostage by their own fears. Other Centimani, most often those who have turned their back on their quest for humanity, refer to the non-Centimani Prometheans by many derogatory nicknames. The Lost, mocking their search for humanity. Livestock, or herd, for their desire to return to the fold of humankind. Or shams, because of their attempts to pass in human society as one of their own. History. Some of the strangest horrors in history may have been Centimani. Prometheans still tell the tale of the many-handed hag of Bangalore, a terrible flesh-eating Centimanus in India, destroyed by British soldiers in the early days of Great Britain's colonization of India. There are urban legends among Prometheans that claim this or that legendary monster was actually one of the Centimani, but there is rarely any actual truth to these tales. More often, however, the reverse is more often true. It is far more common for one of the Centimani to fashion themselves after a terrible monster of legend than it is for a Centimanus to inspire such myths. Walking the Flux Road. When assessing all the dangers of flux, it seems inconceivable that the path would hold appeal for those seeking enlightenment and striving to attain humanity. Prometheans sometimes become disillusioned with other refinements, or grow to feel that they have stalled in their pilgrimage, and become desperate to find something, anything, to bring them closer to their great work. Some believe that failing to study flux is to ignore half of the nature of Pyros, and to leave half of one's lessons unlearned. Others, after being harassed by humans and running afoul of other Prometheans, turn to the flux path out of loneliness, convincing themselves that the company of Pandorans is better than complete solitude. Some have abandoned their quest for humanity altogether and embraced the refinement as a symbol of turning their backs on the pilgrimage. Centimani who journey along their pilgrimage find themselves in the depths of human misery and malevolence. Some among the Centimani view flux as the base of the alchemical operation that will lead them to their magnum opus, the achievement of Elpis. These individuals see the journey from newly created Promethean to human as an alchemical formula. Oculars, as they are so dubbed by those who mock their stand aside and watch views, tend to study flux analytically and frequently from more of a distance than other Centimani. Perhaps because of this, oculars are more frequently able to mitigate flux's influence on them than other Centimani. Some extrapolate that this makes oculars more likely to achieve mortality, that and by holding themselves separate from the chaotic influence they study, they are less prone to falling prey to it and be sidetracked from their pilgrimage. On the other hand, others argue that the exact opposite is true, that by merely observing, rather than immersing themselves wholly in the experiences that bring inspiration, oculars are less able to truly understand the lessons of humanity on a deep and meaningful level. The truth of the matter is that the pilgrimage and achievement of the great work is such a highly personal process that drawing any conclusion as to a particular path's effectiveness is a suspect process at best. Other humanity-bound Centimani compare their path to morality through flux to the night sky. Only on the darkest night, they say, is one able to fully see all of the stars. These philosophers claim that only by seeing the worst of humanity can they truly understand the whole of it, a necessary step toward achieving it themselves. Through interactions with serial killers, drug pushers, pimps, and others that dwell in the seedier sects of society, these Centimani hope to better understand the contrasting human ideals of compassion, selflessness, dignity, and kindness. Unfortunately, for all that their intent is true, far more who set out with this philosophy as their guiding light fall to flux entirely than find humanity. What this says about the power of flux compared to Elpis, or the conclusions that can be drawn about the strength of the dark aspects of humankind compared to its ideals, is open for conjecture. Centimani Athanors. Many believe that developing an Athanor is an essential tool to avoid deviating from their pilgrimage. Depending on their individual viewpoints, they may seek Athanors that focus their ability to understand others' motivations, strengthen their resolve against corruption, or protect them physically, all valuable tools when one walks the flux-driven path. Griffon, Duality, Frankenstein. Throughout history, griffins have served as a symbol of duality, encompassing both attributes within the same being. They were often seen as embodying the best and worst of both worlds. While many Prometheans write flux off as tainted, Centimani frequently see the need to understand the base as well as the refined, the light and the dark, the brutal and the savvy. Centimani who adopt Griffon as their Athanor aspire to balance their study of flux and quest for Elpis simultaneously. Pelican, Sacrifice, Tammuz. Early researchers believe that pelicans fed their young by biting open their breasts and allowing the chicks to feed off their own lifeblood. Pelicans have thus been associated with self-sacrifice and giving on the truest and deepest level. While some Tammuz rebel against their servile nature, seeing humanity as the ultimate freedom from self-sacrifice, some who have walked the flux path through the cesspool of humanity and have managed to retain their drive to achieve their magnum opus have done so through realizing that giving of oneself for the betterment of others is among the noblest of human ideals. Fox, Unnatural Cunning, Ulgan. In almost every human civilization where foxes can be found, they are associated with guile and shyness, as well as with ghosts, spirits, and the supernatural. While all Ulgan learn a certain amount of astuteness when dealing with the spirit world, the refinement of flux leads the Riven even deeper into their intuitive nature, emphasizing traits that will serve them well upon entering the sometimes conniving and underhanded world of humanity. Swan, Grace, Galatea. Although awkward and ungainly on land, in their element, swans are the epitome of grace and symbolize gentle and effortless beauty. Not all physical power is brute strength, and those who have spent time in the refinement of flux tend enough of the dark and ugly side of humanity to treasure the combination of prowess and beauty. They promote and emphasize physical poise and magnificence within a particular element. Owl. Intellect. Osiris. The owl has been a symbol of truth and wisdom for centuries. Ancient Greeks associated the bird with the goddess Athena, who carried an owl on her shoulder. Her pet and advisor, the bird was purported to whisper hidden truths to her, lending to her a reputation as the goddess of wisdom. While some may consider the Osirians to be cold and calculating, their unemotional intelligence serves them well in with the constant corrupting influences. Centimani of the Osirian lineage find that the owl Athanor lends them additional ability to look at situations logically, a vital trait when dealing with the chaos of flux. Practitioners. Sometimes Prometheans find themselves at the center of tragedies that are simply too much to bear. Some make this decision out of abject sorrow. Others become fed up, filled with rage at a world that cannot allow them to exist, becoming the monsters humanity takes them for. Embracing the ways of the Centimani is marked with tremendous rage at a fate undeserved. Nonetheless, almost all Centimani acknowledge that their choice to abandon the pilgrimage came also with a tremendous sense of freedom. Flux is the antithesis of order. Chaos does not demand consistency. Paths to Deviancy. A Promethean's existence is never an easy one, but one even more difficult is the life of a Centimanus. Some created come into consciousness with a little in the way of mentoring, and are forced to learn the reality of their true nature through painful trial and error. These individuals, if they do not manage to stumble across the path of one who teaches them otherwise, may fall to flux before they even have a say in the matter. When brought to the refinement of flux by a route different rather than choice, they are proceeding along a path of enlightenment highly influenced by flux, thus making them almost default members of the Centimani. These created, however, are at a distinct disadvantage. They were never given the most basic of training about Promethean existence, never taught the words to express their own internal struggle between their monstrous nature and their yearning for mortality. While the rare individual may overcome this lack of resources and guidance and successfully traverse their entire pilgrimage without ever learned from or even met another Promethean, many fall into flux-tainted decrepitude, never knowing what they have already lost. It's so off the path that other Centimani go out of their way to avoid such individuals. Think about that for a moment within the context of what was stated earlier in regards to the mirror the Centimani represent, and Prometheans going out of their way to help them. These are the Centimani want nothing to do with. The danger of interacting with one who has completely fallen to flux is far greater than any possible knowledge gleaned from observing their tainted state of existence. These individuals frequently align themselves with Pandorans either as slaves or compatriots, and, having denied themselves the opportunity for growth and renewal through most milestones, seek to strengthen themselves through methods such as the lacuna, preying upon their own kin in a cannibalistic orgy of murder and mayhem that drives them even further away from their magnum opus. They leave the pilgrimage out of hopelessness, depression, and despair. Others come to revel in their superhuman abilities and abstain from trading them away for something as elusive as a mortal soul. These individuals are particularly dangerous, as they have little compunction about preying upon those they see as weak. The Centimanus who attempts to grasp a deeper understanding of what leads humans into the shadows soon finds themselves at home in the darkness. In seeking to understand the evils man visits upon man, the Centimanus finds themselves not only comprehending, but also emulating them. Breaking points. Becoming a Centimanus. Becoming a Centimanus is a special case. In addition to the breaking point, an associated risk of stepping backward, this refinement involves stepping off the pilgrimage entirely. While a Promethean studies the refinement of flux, they cannot achieve any milestones toward their pilgrimage and cannot generate or spend vitriol except on certain applications of the flux transmutation. They don't have to worry about additional breaking points. They are no longer following the path of their pilgrimage, so it doesn't matter if they make mistakes along the way. Lacuna. Another breaking point is to commit lacuna. For some Prometheans, vitriol is a thing to steal, not to earn. Certain Prometheans prey upon others for their vitriol, stealing their progress made on their pilgrimage to use in their own petty, selfish pursuit of power. These soul thieves, as they are sometimes called, are perhaps hated most of all. Prometheans might even forego eliminating Pandorans if it would interfere with their attempt to kill a soul thief, no matter how many times they rise. These disturbed created are mostly Centimani, who cannot generate vitriol of their own as they have stepped aside from their pilgrimage, thus must steal it to attain it. Some, however, are not. Prometheans on their pilgrimage who enjoy the rush of using vitriol to cement their transmutations and cannot wait for their internal alchemies to produce more may tear it from their companions. Pandorans, too, reap vitriol from the created, using it to fuel their transformation into sublimati, as well as develop transmutations. Again, the process of stealing this vitriol, of stealing away the evidence of a Promethean's progress upon their pilgrimage, is called the lacuna. However, the worst part of the experience isn't tearing into a Promethean and pulling out the viscous acidic fluid. That substance is the alchemical distillation of the knowledge the victim has accrued on their pilgrimage. Some victims experience blank spots, a complete loss of memory around a milestone. Others can remember the milestone, but in a detached way, without the emotional or spiritual link that sparked the discovery. The sudden loss of memory is a violation of their very self, and leaves the created worrying what else they might lose if they undergo the process again. However, the creature performing the lacuna gains none of the victim's memories. Vitriol is both a catalyst and a byproduct of a milestone, a fungible substance that doesn't carry the memory of a specific event. Even if the victim were to perform lacuna back against their attackers, the memory would still be lost. A Promethean performing a lacuna upon another of their kind must restrain their victim or otherwise leave them unable to resist. They grab and squeeze their victim's body and may even plunge their hands deep into their victim's chest to coax the vitriol out. It takes about 10 minutes for the vitriol to bubble to the surface when the attacker can consume it. Performing a lacuna is always a step backwards. Should the attacker succeed, their roll to resist stepping backward is reduced to a chance die. Rolls. The Refinement of Flux has no rolls. Those walking its path cannot achieve milestones or advance on the pilgrimage. Life as a Centimanus consists of steps backward, not forward. Philosophy. The first lesson Prometheans learn is that the life of a monster is lonely, and it is upon this lesson that the philosophy of the Centimani is built. Humanity scorns that which is powerful, that which is hideous, that which is not like itself. The Centimani understand that Prometheans stand finally between the worlds of humanity and that of the monstrous. Most Prometheans attempt to turn their backs on their nature as monsters, seeking instead to find mortality, to obtain humanity. But the Centimani reverse exactly opposite, embracing the opposite other half of their legacy that is denied by their brethren. In short, the Centimani desire nothing more than to be monsters. To this end, they shun humanity and immerse themselves in the trappings of what monsters seek, taking up dwellings in ruins and places far out of reach. Some Centimani even take up company with other monsters, seeking out vampires, werewolves, and especially Pandorans, as a meaning of alleviating solitude and sharpening their wits and predatory urges. Of course, not all the other creatures of the world of darkness are interested in such company. Generally, only those vampires and werewolves who are particularly debased and inhuman themselves are likely to find any benefit from these associations, making for a true company of monsters indeed. Sense of morality. Though the Centimani would paint a picture of themselves as grotesque philosopher monsters, most of them are actually just simple souls that have been hurt too many times and are trying to flee the source of that hurt. Seen as grand monsters, when in reality, they were simply wounded people seeking to deny what they saw as a weakness within themselves. They reason if one is a monster, without human emotion or care, then one can never truly experience loneliness or rejection again. 1. You are not human. The Centimanus accepts, finally, that they are not human, and rare is the Promethean who can admit this. Not yet human, or not fully human, seem to be favorite terms for Prometheans who cling to other refinements. The Centimani, however, cast aside that association utterly, sometimes going to tremendous lengths to rid themselves of what they view as their one true weakness: humanity. Humans need regular sleep, 3 square meals a day, and must shield themselves against the elements lest they sicken and die. Centimani do not pretend to be human. They sleep only when they must. Many stop wearing clothes, adorning themselves instead with trophies to make themselves more terrifying. 2. Serve yourself. Monsters are not benevolent. They need not to be actively malicious, but a monster must serve itself. Monsters best understand arrangements that benefit themselves. When one is not able to see the obvious benefit to a Centimanus' actions, they must search for the hidden ones, as the freaks always seek to benefit themselves. All living beings are inherently selfish, and only by acknowledging and accepting that one's own needs are just as important as the needs of others can a human being truly find compassion. Those Centimani who yet cling to the pilgrimage teach this. 3. In division, wholeness. The first step of most alchemical processes is breaking something down into its base components, separating the gross from the sublime. Purity, whether of purpose or nature, comes only after the extraneous, cumbersome parts that do not support the thing have been gotten rid of. The Centimani who delve into inhuman behavior and habits understand that as they break away the limitations and assumptions of humanity, they are made more monstrous. Centimani who continue their pilgrimage are very cautious with this concept. They do not believe that one's humanity and sanity should be broken down, but one's misconceptions about one's true nature. Monsters do not have friends. They live in isolation on the outskirts of civilization. They find the ruined places, the wastelands and the wilderness, and they only leave to hunt among the weak and defenseless. Many embrace this ideal by systematically destroying all bonds they held in their former life. Although some Centimani scorch their old life to the ground upon joining the Hundred-Handed, this can be as simple as traveling someplace new where they are unknown. However, it could be as brutal as a ritual murder of every person they have any connection to. Practices and operations. The life of a Centimanus is equal parts exhilaration, horror, liberation, as well as loneliness. This lends to great amounts of self-reflection, and no matter the form they undertake, they struggle to maintain their sense of self. This end leads to obsession, as the Centimani are constantly looking for distractions to keep them occupied while traveling this path. Transform the self. This is the first and foremost directive of the Centimani. The Prometheans' will over the static imprisonment of their body's human shape delivers an exact opposite effect in the Centimani. To the Centimani, one is not one's physical form. The body is but a tool, like any other, to be changed as the needs of expressing inner truth demands. They seek to be more monstrous, embracing their ideals and body, while those who remain on the pilgrimage seek to divorce themselves from the idea of the body as self. Freaks abandon human definitions of beauty. They accept deformity and monstrous beauty. The flesh is malleable, and Centimani are slaves of change, so their appearance should similarly be in a constant state of flux, reflecting the whims of the monster within. The lair. Home is where the heart is. A home is simply seen as an extension of the body, reflecting the inner selves of its inhabitants. As such, many Centimani seek out a lair. The lair of a Centimanus is equal parts sanctum sanctorum, or headquarters, kennels, and death trap. Rare is the Centimani lair that is not equipped with a variety of security systems, including traps, alarm systems, and Pandoran pens. Every monster has its lair, a place where it can hide during its slumber and kennel its beasts. It is someplace defensible, hard to reach, and full of traps and pitfalls. It is also the monster's inner sanctum, where it hides secrets of the person it once was or aspired to be. Trinkets, mementos, and keepsakes that represent what identity it still clings to. For those Centimani who have lost their grip on sanity, their layers covered in incoherent scribbles and pictograms in a desperate attempt to preserve what memories are left to them. Live, laugh, loathe. Pandoran Study. Centimani find the purity of Pandoran interaction with Flux admirable and enviable. Almost everything Prometheans know about Pandorans comes from the Centimani, who are the only beings who can get close enough to study them. A Zothic memory, however, does provide some information as well. The Centimani utilize Pandorans much like one does with a pack of bloodhounds to flush out their prey. They also care for them, as they aren't just servants, but the blueprints of the genetic code that allows them to explore the malleability of their own flesh. Centimani keep their Pandoran packs fed and healthy by allowing them to consume some of the Centimani's own flesh occasionally, which they easily repair through the use of transmutations or electricity. Some deliberately keep the Pandorans at full pyros in order to attempt to trigger flux hunger so they might add a precipitatus to their routine. In fact, it was the Centimani who identified the three base precipitati, which they named after the Hecatoncheires of Greek mythology: Briareus the Vigorous, Cotus the Furious, and Gyges the Cunning. Likewise, rather than the Pandoran pets with which the Centimani like to surround themselves, a Sublimanus' relationship to any Centimanus it accompanies is more akin to a partnership in a cabinet of horrors than one of subservience. Usual skills. Centimani are often called upon to engage in raw physical effort to survive, especially if they interact with Pandorans on a regular basis. As such, a variety of physical skills, such as athletics and brawl, come in handy, as does intimidation. Centimani are also called upon to understand the strange flux, however, meaning that many of them seek out knowledge of medicine and occult as well. Treading in dark places. In attempting to understand humanity through flux, Centimani find themselves in the underbelly of civilization. Centimani are drawn to organizations that exhibit apathy toward or take advantage of those in need. Likewise, Centimani are also often called to study subjects that humans consider taboo. Sites associated with death and dying or with sex are often favorite Centimani haunts: hospitals, military bases, slaughterhouses and packing plants, morgues, funeral homes, brothels, and back alleys often teach the Centimani more about human nature than most humans are ready to understand. In the cesspool, amidst the hatred, stupidity, and desperation, the Centimani hope to find the key to transforming their own monstrous natures into something greater. Transmutations. In first edition, Centimani would obtain Pandoran Transmutations, as the Centimani may learn Pandoran Transmutations without the usual negative side effects. In second edition, they gain their own set of transmutations called Flux. However, much like my Pandoran video, I highly suggest applying 1E transmutations and ideas into 2E. Are the rules different? Yes. Will it be harder to put them together? It makes sense in time. However, the reason I bring this up is that one can trace the lineage of 1E into 2E. Unfortunately, 2E makes it way too streamlined to fully comprehend the sheer grandioseness these monsters deserve. If you were to look at 2E without the scope of 1E, half of these transmutations lose the impact of what can be accomplished. Making it more accessible to everyone is always a great idea. However, what I'm trying to say here is that you really need to check out 1E to see what they can do in 2E, because 2E fails to explain it to the extent that really displays the prowess of the Centimani. And for a full explanation on these transformations, please check out the Pandoran segment of this series. Although these transmutations are available to any Promethean, few aside from the Centimani choose to develop and use them. However, those who practice the Centimani refinement do not risk degeneration in this fashion. Centimani who have turned their backs on the pilgrimage note this with satisfaction, pointing out that perhaps it is actually the mad goals of the pilgrimage that bring insanity. Those Centimani who are still part of the pilgrimage suggest that perhaps it is because in embracing the monster they are, they may find and keep their true humanity. To freaks, flux is a discipline, religion to some and science to others. It is their philosophy and their occupation. As long as they maintain self-awareness, they gain insight from the mad flow of flux through them and use it rather than being used by it. Mastering flux, however, is still intrinsically an act of self-destruction. The Centimanus must sacrifice their own enlightenment to the void to learn its secrets. A. Pandoran Transmutations 1E. Before going into the 2E transmutations, I wanted to take a moment to discuss these in context. Hiding monstrousness. 3 raccoons in a trench coat trying to sneak into a movie theater. Some Centimani have been known to use this transmutation to go among humans for a short period of time. Any general ugliness may be removed with 3 successes, though this effect does nothing to assuage disquiet. Transmutations that have altered the body may also be removed, requiring a number of successes equal to double the dot cost. These changes do not go away though, they are merely subsumed within the body. A Pandoran may spend 1 pyros to instantly regrow those physical transmutations. Swallow. The Pandoran consumes, and at any point in the future may regurgitate an object. Doing so takes a minute, but the Pandoran may elect to spend a willpower point to quickly vomit it up in a single turn, which solidifies into the object's normal form once more, without loss of either strength or shape, though some objects may discolor. In this fashion, many Centimani smuggle weapons inside themselves, so they are never without one. Mantle of Lordship. A Centimanus or Sublimanus may create connections of sympathy with Pandorans, exerting control over them. Only a Promethean or Sublimanus Pandoran can develop this transmutation. Non-Centimani who use this transmutation risk humanity loss, as normal for using Pandoran transmutations. The demands of this power, aligning one's psyche with those of ravenous inhuman manifestations of flux, take such a toll on the Promethean that their player rolls only 2 dice when resisting potential humanity loss. We will revisit its 2e counterpart shortly. B. Flux transmutations. 2e. By giving themselves over to flux, Centimani are fundamentally changed, as flux always comes with a cost. These changes are expressed through flux alembics, and the powers Centimani gain are not just things that other Prometheans can't do, but things they would never do. They become tainted. Flux is divided into 4 alembics. Those alembics are Blight, feeding disquiet; Lordship, controlling Pandorans; Mutation, physical transformation; and Solvent, canceling transmutations. The storyteller determines how many alembics a Centimanus has learned, based on how long the character has followed the refinement of flux. Blight. While most Prometheans struggle against the darker aspects of the divine fire, Centimani embrace flux and can feed it to exacerbate its manifestations. Disquiet can be sown and nurtured, wastelands grown, and firestorms beckoned. The Centimanus revels in the destructive power these represent. Persistent. The Centimanus is so acclimated to the energy of flux that they ignore extreme environmental effects caused by wastelands or firestorms. Invoke disquiet. The Centimanus encourages the flux within an individual in order to feed disquiet, either calling it into being or making it worse. This is a useful tool to inconvenience another Promethean, or as a way to drive those affected by their Pandoran's disquiet further into destruction and madness. It is not unknown for a repentant Centimanus, racked with guilt for what they have done, to use this power to turn the mob on themselves to end their suffering. Aggravate wasteland. By tainting their surroundings with flux, the freak either brings about a wasteland or worsens the one that is already there. Summon firestorm. By pouring out flux in a torrent, the Centimanus is able to create a firestorm in a wasteland. This is usually done to awaken the local Pandorans. Also note, in the near future, there's going to be a video dedicated to firestorms. After this section, I'm going to give you a little taste of what this entails. Lordship. Coincides with Mantle of Lordship for 1e. The Centimanus' attunement with flux puts them on the same wavelength as the Pandorans. As soon as they give themselves over to the side of their nature, the Pandorans recognize them as one of their own. By playing on this empathy, they are able to influence Pandorans, or even gather them into packs with themselves at the head. The role is only necessary when the Centimanus is trying to assume command of Pandorans while distracted, like when engaged in combat. Otherwise, they just pay the pyros cost and assume control. Unlike most alembics, Lordship does not have multiple distillations. The more pyros it is charged with, the more Pandorans can be controlled. Mutation. The Centimani are twisted and mutated by flux. It introduces changes to their bodies similar to those that afflict the Pandorans. Even when temporary, the transformation is traumatic. When a freak uses stolen vitriol to make it permanent, it is one step closer to irrevocably turning them into a monster. Sometimes the freak is emulating an ability they observed in a Pandoran, but more often the mutation is an instinctual change in reaction to a situation. Unlike most alembics, mutation does not have multiple distillations. The more pyros it is charged with, the stronger the dread powers they can manifest. Again, let me reiterate my frustration. You can see where those original Pandoran transmutations ended up in 2E, right here. This is why I have to explain both. Being brief in this case makes it easier to comprehend, but limits the creativity of the players as you don't know what you're really working with. They kinda lump everything into these dread powers. They are not the same as looking at the transmutations the Pandorans get in 1E. They are terrifying. I highly advise looking at what a Pandoran can do in 1E and applying that in 2E when you take this power. Trust me, you're gonna have your mind blown away when you do it that way instead of looking at dread powers. Speaking of which, I don't think any member of the Botch Pit actually likes dread powers. That's a whole separate video for later. Solvent. A freak can feed flux into the transmutations of others to cause them to fail, often catastrophically, or to produce unexpected results. Disruption. The Centimanus degrades the transmutations of other Prometheans, tainting them with decay and dissolution so that pyros leaks uselessly from the alembic. The solvent alembic must be charged to the same level as the target alembic in order for this ability to work. Disaster. The freak causes a distillation being activated by another Promethean to fail. Detonation. The Centimanus uses the power of their enemies' alembics against them by tainting the pyros used to charge it with flux in order to cause them damage. A Centimanus is constantly experimenting, driving themselves to new extremes. Night Horrors the Tormented adds 2 more tricks to the Centimanus' arsenal: Cannibalize and Unleash. Cannibalize. With a bit of due diligence and a suppressed gag reflex, a freak can consume the strengths of others to prepare themselves for the trials to come. Mortal and supernatural creatures alike all become a feast for the ravenous freak. Amplitude. The freak may consume the physical and mental merits of other beings. This cannibalism must make sense in the context of the merit being consumed. Acumen. The freak may consume the skills of another being. They consume body parts in some way relating to the ability, eyeballs for investigation, or a hand for weaponry. If the freak's victim has a rating in the ability equal to or greater than the freak's own, they can learn from the consumed flesh. Endowment. The freak may consume the attributes of another being. They must consume a health point's worth of flesh for every point of the attribute stolen from the victim, and the part should be related in some way to attributes they are ingesting. Unleash. A Centimanus learns what it is to live as a divine fire and to burn their enemies with it. Invigorate. The freak strokes the furnace of their pyros, fanning its temperature until only their own body, now boiling with azoth inside, can contain it. Infuse. The Centimanus directs coursing pyros within, channeling it through their created form and expelling it from their pores. Their hands and feet burn with azothic fire, giving them a lethal advantage in hand-to-hand combat. Azothic Mantle. Now truly the master of pyros, the freak wraps themselves in azothic fire. Flames rush from their form, seeking to consume other sources of pyros. Their body burns with a fiery countenance, and their outline is surrounded in impossibly bright flames. Gonna say it. Super Saiyan. Refinement Condition. Destructive. The Centimani are tuned into the flux and have an instinct for physical weakness. By spending a point of pyros, a freak can ignore a number of points of durability on armor equal to their azoth for one attack. The Generative Act. There comes a stage in every Promethean's pilgrimage where they must bequeath their curse to another, instilling divine fire into a dead corpse and bringing it to life as a new Promethean. The act of creating a Promethean is called multiplicatio, or multiplication, a necessary stage before the creator can achieve the new dawn. Some refuse to take the stage, others fear it, and others more relish in it. Some actually want to create others of their own kind, either as companions, devoted children, or perhaps populating the world with a new master race. If they get it wrong, if they have not sufficiently purified themselves, it won't be a Promethean they create, but a Pandoran, or many Pandorans at once. If the creator results in the generation of Pandorans, however, it is called Epimetheus's folly. There are created, such as the Centimani, who want their generative operation to go awry so that they can plague the world with more Pandorans. If the creator practices the refinement of flux, they lose a die in this process from the beginning. Note, a dramatic failure can't occur in this process. Some Prometheans go a step further and insist that multiplicatio is only fulfilled by returning a Centimanus to the pilgrimage, though if that is the case, it's a wonder that any Prometheans have passed this stage at all. The 7 Deadly Sins. The story of the prodigal demiurge, just as many epic great truths, has been adopted into one form or another by many of humanity's cultures throughout the ages. As with the stories of the garden and the flood, many religions speak of the separating out of part of the Godhead as part of the early history of the world. Christian mythologies relate this story in the form of Lucifer being cast out of heaven, while Loki was bound to a rock to await Ragnarok. These stories, along with those of the war between the Olympians and the Titans in Greek legend, and the Aesir and Jotun in Norse myth, all share common roots in the prodigal demiurge, being manifestations of the story told in the context that humans, unaware of the presence of Prometheans, could understand. The creatures that the prodigal created, imperfect and born of failure, were the progenitors of each of the Promethean lineages. Because of this origin, all created must create another of their kind before they can undergo redemption. Similar to their prodigal creator, they must pass along the burden of their imperfections to another before they may go on to their final destiny. Those who believe the story of the prodigal demiurge, either as literal truth or as a parable about the nature of the created, often equate each of the known lineages with one of the archetypical vices, a connection that only strengthens the link between the prodigal demiurge and the mystical demons and devils. Wrath goes to the wretched, envy to the Galatea, pride to the Nepri, sloth to the Tammuz, greed to the Riven, gluttony to the Ziki, lust to the Unfleshed. And at that point in time, the book containing the Unfleshed, Saturnine Night, hadn't been written, but they alluded to the notion of a lust lineage able to spawn communicable disease with the same virulence the nuclear Prometheans have for causing cancer. While the Centimanus can be stemmed of any lineage, it is likely to become an all-consuming identity, more akin to a lineage than a refinement. The 100-handed are often seen as perversions, their craving for the destructive energy of flux, simulating the cravings of human lust as well. Firestorms. A Promethean is an engine of change, an artificial or piecemeal body wrapped around a core of Azoth. Some Prometheans, especially Unfleshed, think of Pyrus as fuel and Azoth as a flame burning it. Within the engine of a Promethean, Pyrus is relatively safe. If the fire burns too hot, it reveals the Promethean's disfigurements. If the Promethean uses too much pyros too quickly, some of it leaks into the environment like spilled gasoline, polluting the surroundings into a wasteland. A wasteland can subside on its own given time, especially if the Promethean responsible leaves. Gradually, the world absorbs the spilled fuel of pyros. If that fuel should catch a spark, however, everything explodes. Pyros isn't precisely fuel, it's change, the raw stuff of potential change, either fusion, elpis, or entropy, flux. Pyros is also its own catalyst. Put it with more pyros and you run the risk of a chain reaction. When too much pyros gathers in one place, it can suddenly manifest. All the pent-up potential burns off in a violent display of raw power. Prometheans are among the greatest concentrations of pyros in the world, and as such, they can set it alight by accident or design. Not every Promethean experiences the pain and terror of pyros gone amok, but most do at some point in the pilgrimage. The Azothic memory warns of firestorms, also called Eumenidean vortices. Some Prometheans, especially the Centimani, even trigger them deliberately in order to use the fires of flux as a weapon. Centimani, thanks to their affinity with flux, often have a fascination with the spectacular displays of flux's power within a vortex. Centimani sources regarding firestorms describe them as expressions of power or something that can be harnessed. Some even regard the study of vortices as a replacement for the great work. Again, firestorms will be explored in greater detail in an upcoming video. Most of those who are aware of the existence of firestorms are content to limit their knowledge of the phenomena to how to avoid or at least survive the fury of these tempests. Some foolhardy individuals, predominantly Ophidians and Centimani, pursue firestorms and knowledge of them. These Eumidians seek to understand more about the nature of Pyros, or of Flux, in the case of the Centimani, through their studies. On to other roads. Just as many different reasons motivate a Centimanus to leave the refinement, time may come when they simply feel that they have learned all they can from humanity's darker side. Others may find themselves hurt by their experiences and may seek to delve deeper into their torment, channeling the negativity into growth through the study of the refinement of tin. Cuprum offers the opportunity to find inner solace and strength after the trials of following the flux path. Those who dabbled heavily in Pandoran Transmutations often leave the refinement of flux for that of quicksilver, although the alchemical studies may seem constrained after those of flux. All told, the least common refinement for Centimani to pursue after studying flux is that of Ferrum. No matter where their post-flux path takes them, a Centimanus is often found facing a challenge that other refinements don't have to deal with. Some Prometheans even consider them refugees and offer guidance and mentorship. Others shun them completely. While leaving the refinement for another, they discover that their time as a freak has left them not only physical scars, but emotional and social ones as well. Rebuilding dangerously low humanity can be a daunting task for a newly non-Centimanus Promethean, especially when hampered by the prejudices of humans who react especially poorly to the alien wrongness of a low humanity Promethean. Centimani who have been either touched by or fully embrace flux warping influence are rarely so fortunate. Humans may overlook a missing or mangled appendage, but this only goes so far. Obvious effects of Pandoran transmutations do not sit well with non-Centimani Prometheans either. While they may be more intellectually prepared to deal with encountering these grotesque transmutations, these manifestations are reminders to each Promethean of their most hated and feared Pandoran nemesises, as well as their own monstrous nature. As such, they have adopted a variety of means of hiding their natures. Many Centimani do their best to mask their disfigurements through simple physical means, hats, bulky coats, and the like, as well as through simply avoiding close scrutiny when possible. Others expend the time and energy to utilize the flesh-melting abilities of Maliate, or more intense study of the physical transmutations themselves, in order to reduce or obscure the physical marks of the transmutations for a time. A few, desperate for human interaction and possessing transmutations too severe to overcome with more mundane tools, have delved deeper into the power of flux and spun from its chaotic tides the ability to mask themselves in manskin, a Pandoran transmutation that allows them to appear entirely human for a short time. However, as with all powerful gifts, the cost is commensurate. Non-Centimani view freaks with varying degrees of distrust, fear, and even hatred. As if this wasn't enough, Centimani are cannibals in regards to vitriol. However, there are reasons as to why a Centimani would want to be part of a throng, as well as their members benefiting from having one around, despite the consequences. First and foremost, the same desire that leads any Promethean to seek others of their kind, companionship. Even if that interaction is dangerous and reminds one of one's own deep and inherent flaws, it is still full of potential for companionship. Remember, not all Centimani began their existences following the refinement of flux. Most came to it through one of the more traditional pathways, meaning they may have traveled the same philosophical road and dealt with the same dilemmas that a non-Centimanus they encountered is currently facing. Now, this isn't always the case, however, a potential outlook. The advantages of being part of a throng are undeniable. When faced with a desperate choice between deceiving and being accepted, or being honest and facing the next milestone alone, it is not unheard of for a Centimanus to lie about their refinement. This always doesn't work out. Centimani throng members also offer their brethren some unique advantages. First among these advantages is also the largest danger thereof, the Centimani connection with Flux and the Pandorans. One of the Centimani's biggest dangers, their dealings with Pandorans, may also be one of the largest strengths the Centimani have to offer non-Centimani. This double-edged sword, the knowledge and ability to manipulate and defend against creatures of Flux and Flux itself, has saved more than one throng from falling prey to Pandoran attacks or devastating firestorms. The Centimani also learned tricks such as evading Pandoran attacks by darting into crowded areas that many Prometheans may not have been privy to. The other lineages' point of view. Of the lineages, Frankensteins and Osiris readily adopt this refinement in their despair. However, we're going to analyze the Centimani from each lineage's point of view. Frankenstein. For the wretched, their inability to live peacefully among men sometimes means embracing their truly monstrous nature. A Frankenstein who begins to practice Centimanus out of disillusionment with the great work can be one of the most fervent monsters one could hope never to meet. Example, the organ thief. In the local region or village or town or in the city, panic grips the ordinary people as an unknown individual begins to steal body parts. It's the same body part each time. It could be right hands, right eyes, or livers, or kidneys, or lungs, or perhaps left feet. The thief doesn't necessarily have to leave his victims dead, although all are traumatized and many go mad. The question is, of course, why? Where does the obsessive theft of one body part lead? The thief is a Frankenstein, possibly, but not necessarily a Centimanus, and they seek a perfect example of that one particular part. What do they need it for? Is it to complete something? Are they missing it themselves? And even if they have a dozen perfectly good examples of the part, are they sane enough to know that? Galatea. The lineage least likely to seek out the study of flux is that of the Muse, and with good reason. There is very little that is numinous or beautiful about the Centimani. Some Galateans, however, sickened with humanity's fragility and hate, embrace this legacy in seething rage, finding a new definition for the word beauty within themselves. Even Galateans have their limits, and one whose heart is constantly broken may eventually give into the pain. Such muses are often referred to as Gorgons by other Galateans, and they often feature in tales of destroyed beauty that warn against meddling in such a wicked discipline. Osiris. Perhaps most twisted of all, some Osiris have been known to seek out what revelations can be learned from the creation of Pandorans. This ties in closely with the Nepri Perchant for Centimanus, where the Osiris lineage numbers more practitioners of the refinement of flux than any other. Such a desire for power over the Pandorans stems from both emotional and moral distance, as well as from the Osiris legend that Isis, mother of the lineage, was the first Promethean to practice the refinement. Handled well, the Osiris can be terrifying without even starting on the path to Centimani. Tammuz. The Tammuz hate the control that Centimani usually dictates, but they can also be pushed onto this path when negativity becomes a constant in their lives. The Tammuz, who tend to despise slavery, find the control that these arts usually give them over Pandorans extremely disconcerting. Ulgan. The Riven sometimes find that they have more in common with the strange demons and weird spirits of the unseen world than that they do with mortals, so they seek to become more like those creatures. They abandon the pilgrimage toward humanity in favor of what they perceive as the pilgrimage to something else. Some Ulgan also readily follow the Centimani, giving up their path to humanity in order to adopt one that they might view as another kind of spirituality. The Unfleshed. Ideally, the Unfleshed pilgrimage sees them turning from the logic, perfection, and clear sight of their purpose they possess as artificial beings, to the emotion, subjectivity, and fallibility that comes with humanity, becoming tools that have learned how to use themselves. The susceptibility of Unfleshed to repeating functions in times of intense torment and hatred is a commonplace. This isn't a far cry from the Centimani, who slowly lose their grip of self, relying on routine to maintain some distorted sense of stability. One could also make the argument that aren't all Unfleshed Centimani? That's something for a later video. Extempore. The generation of certain extempores could be the result of Centimani interference, although the only consistency among the extempore is that every one of them is unique. Extempore could also be created when something goes wrong in what should be a relative routine creation process. A Frankenstein realizes part of their creation wasn't human, a Tammuz buries their creation in a haunted graveyard, etc. If a ritual doesn't fail outright in the production of Pandorans, an Extempore can be created. Firestorms can also result in the creation of Extempores. Zeka. The Zeka are considered to be the masters of the Centimani refinement. Born from horrific conditions and possessing a pessimistic outlook on the world, it's no surprise their twisted nature leads them to the practice of Centimani, and it's incredibly hard for them to leave it. A Zeka Centimanus gets to buy both Pandoran Transmutations and Irradiation Transmutations at level ×5 experience. A Zeka Centimanus could well be a zombie-creating force of anti-nature, a vast, near-unstoppable evil standing just at the edge of a chronicle, a murdering, sociopathic horror who stands at the center of a fallout-covered wilderness. The other refinement's point of view. Aurum. The Prometheans who practice Aurum believe that they have it the hardest. Not for them the easy surrender to fury that Stannum brings, or the aromatic seclusions of Cuprum. Not for them the sweet surrender to Flux and taint that empowers the Centimani. A mimic is unlikely to join the Centimani, at least not before practicing another refinement for a while. Although disillusionment is a constant danger, even the most disillusioned atomists balk at the refinement of Flux. It's too much of a leap. Lashing out in wrath and frustration is one thing, but it's another thing to abandon the pilgrimage and embrace the role of a monster. Atomists, as well, are likely to bar Centimani from their numbers, although if the freak is able to convince the mimic of their sincere beliefs regarding using the Flux refinement as a way of studying humanity's darker nature, the mimic might come around. Cuprum. The practitioners of Cuprum are as likely as any other Promethean to give up on the pilgrimage and join the Centimani. A pariah can see firsthand what Flux does to the world. All they need is to convince the idea that the Flux they bleed into the world is part of them, a product of change that refines and transforms them, and the seed is planted. Then comes experimentation. Soon, they're transforming their body in even more grotesque ways, delighting in their abandonment of any pretense at humanity. They're a Centimanus before they realize. Copper Prometheans sometimes envy the power of Centimani to alter their forms so extremely, but note that when changing oneself, being able to change back is always preferable. From a practical standpoint, many Cuprum fear the hundred-handed, for the pariahs are often alone, while the Centimani frequently have Pandorans at their sides. The trust of a pariah, once won, is lasting, but the Copper Prometheans do not extend this trust to the freaks easily. Ferrum. One who grows weary of the world's hate can turn easily to the refinement of tin. Sometimes this change in outlook can simply come as a result of strange fascinations. More than one Ferrum has turned to the practice of Centimani after seeing the changes that refinement can make to the body of a Promethean. Followers of Ferrum, for the most part, are accepting of Centimani, especially those of the hundred-handed who have parlayed their Flux studies into martial skills. Plumbum. The Centimani view them as rooting through the muck, looking for meaning. Plumbum is rare because most Prometheans would choose to deny their true nature in the pursuit of their great work, and it has always followed after another refinement has been followed. They are exact opposites of the Centimani. Stannum. Anyone who knows the Promethean condition knows that Stannum isn't actually a refinement. It's a default Promethean condition, wallowing around in anger and resentment. It's the refinement that isn't. It's the only one whose practitioners don't seek to better themselves. Even the Centimani are interested in becoming better monsters. Stannum teaches Prometheans to become trapped by what their creators intended for them, rather than what they learned to become. Likewise, Stannum Prometheans often find that they can learn much from the Centimani, and many a Fury has found themselves walking the Flux path after a long conversation with one of the freaks. Ease. Ease is the refinement of bronze, and is practiced by those who seek to gain mortality by protecting, guiding, and helping the other Prometheans they live, travel, and work with. The only thing the Centimani will be helping is themselves to that sweet, sweet vitriol of their fellow Prometheans. They would pity the Centimani if they didn't know better. Argentum. One path to Argentum comes from the idea that Prometheans stand out among supernaturals since they never were technically mortal. Even though most come from human body parts, they have no memory of the life or lives those limbs and organs came from. However, vampires, werewolves, and mages almost always led something of a normal mortal life before their transformations, and some Prometheans become fascinated by this. Some mystics come to Argentum out of an inability to fit in with humanity at all, and others simply because of an interest in the supernatural and occult. As a further extension, many mystics also delve deeply into studies of madness and insanity, which often finds ways of often appearing among humans who claim to have had contact with supernatural creatures and are often dismissed or misdiagnosed. This is a dark path toward embracing the Centimani's philosophical teachings. Cobalus. The Centimani see the Cobalus humanity as their impurity, and the Cobalus never want to be compared to the Centimani. Rather than shun or reconcile the effects of torment and disquiet, a Cathar will encourage and exacerbate them in order to deal with them openly. Cathars also tend, unlike most Prometheans, to remain in areas for long periods of time. As their wasteland spreads and the effects of their disquiet become more pronounced, the Cathar will have more and more outlets to examine for clues, a deep examination of the negative aspects of Promethean nature. Mercurius. While it is not unheard of for a serpent to come to the refinement of quicksilver from that of flux, it more commonly happens the other way around. Having spent time studying the power of Pyros, and its effects both within and without, Ophidians often turn their attention more directly to the chaotic side of Pyros, and dabbing deeper in the power of undoing. Some serpents do transition to becoming freaks from Mercurius, a move that non-Centimanus often referred to as being seduced by flux. Of the 5 major refinements, pursuers of Mercurius are, surprisingly, among the least likely to accept Centimani into their throngs. While Ophidians recognize flux to be a part of the Pyros they themselves study, most feel that to focus on the taint rather than the purity of Pyros is not only foolish, but counterproductive to ever achieving true enlightenment. They see the Centimani as what happens if you don't account for all the variables. Phosphorum. The refinement of Phosphorus, and practiced by Prometheans that cannot wait for the magnum opus, for whatever reason, whether it be nearly reaching it and failed, or their torment driving them ever deeper into despair. They become lightbringers, beacons to their throng and to all Prometheans, lighting the way toward the long road ahead even if they burn out in the process. Turning to the Centimani is something they won't even try once. Conclusion. This concludes our broadcast on Centimani, also known as the Hundred-Handed and the Freaks who practice the refinement of Flux and Promethean the Created. As a side note, the Centimani are among my favorite creatures in all of Promethean, and honestly the past few Flux videos I've done were to lay the groundwork for them. They are, in my opinion, among the top antagonists in all of the Chronicles of Darkness lines. They're the monsters who explore the darker side of humanity, those monsters who wish only to become better monsters. The Black Mirror, the abyss that gazes back at you. There. Perfect. This has been Nick from the Botch Pit. Thank you.